start with, no, we are in, it's chapter 6, but it's lesson 8. So, see, one of the topics that I think has been written about by counselors and psychologists and psychiatrists and child development specialists is this whole idea of self-esteem, self-concept, same thing as identity. So much has been written about it. And then in the church, you don't hear very much about identity. You hear things such as, oh, my identity is in Christ, or you hear things such as, well, maybe my identity is in who God made me to be. So this is a very important topic across the board. And I thought the best way to start this is to kind of define what is identity. What do we mean by identity? Well, when you look in the dictionary, you can see a lot of things that they say. A lot of it is really what I call perceived identity or acquired identity. But they're missing the whole point of what I call true identity. In order to get into this, I thought to myself, let's go to some of the oldest writings where we derive some of our understanding of, who are we as individuals? Are we what people say we are? Are we what certain tests reveal us to be? What are we? What is identity? So it is our sense of who we are as individuals. That's one of the simplest definitions of identity. So when I say managing your identity, it means that you and I have a responsibility to deal with identity, to understand it, and to be able to manage it. By the end of the lesson, you're going to see why that is important to know how to manage our identity, because we do have that identity. We are individuals, and we do have a sense of who we are. Now, one of the oldest writings, is like what we find in the Bible. So I'm going to read this. It's from Genesis. It's an interesting passage when you are thinking about what are we, who are we as people. Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 and 27. It reads like this. And God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Then it says, male and female created he them. So, according to that passage, the idea of man actually came from God. He thought of the idea. And if you follow that account of creation as we know it, Adam, the man, God took dirt and made into this thing that he breathed into it, and man became a living soul. So we can say that's where we came from. When I was a kid, we made a lot of things as kids, some of it just in the village that we wanted to make our own things. And then at school, you make certain things. And actually, I do have some things that I made when I was in grade school that is at my house. I think at my birthday a couple weeks ago or 2 weeks ago, actually Cindy had some of those things that I made when I was a kid. And one of my favorite things that I used to make that I liked very much was plates and spoons and knives, all out of wood. And I was very proud of this. And one time when I made my spoon and the plate, my older sister saw it before it was totally finished. And she said, we need to put this in the fire and so we can cook with it. And I was very, very upset about it. I said, no, that's my spoon and that's my plate. I'm going to eat from it. It doesn't look like it right now. I said, you wait until I finish. When I finished, it was so good. And actually, sometimes she ate from that plate as well. So when we make things for a purpose, and we're proud of what we make. So according to this passage we just read, it took, when I say all of God, I mean the whole Trinity, God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. That's why the language there is, let us make men. I do not say to myself, let us do this, because I'm just one person. If I use us, that means I have somebody else. So you'll see as we go through the lesson why this becomes a central theme in understanding this whole idea of who are we and where did we come from. Who can tell us who we are? One of the things in psychology is that psychologists are used to telling people their personality type. You are this type, you are this type, you are this type. But that is not encompassing the whole idea of identity. It's talking about some of the expressions of that person's identity. There's another passage that I think is interesting that I'll read for you, and this one is also from one of the older books, from Psalm chapter 139, and let me see. From verse 14, so that we don't read the whole psalm. It says this is David actually talking to God about this whole idea of who he was. He says, my substance was not hidden from you when I was made in secret, intricately wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. And then he says, your eyes did see my substance, yet being unformed. And in your book all my members are written, which in continuance with fashioned with you, there was none that were not recorded. Then it says, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. My spoon and my plate that I made, my sister didn't think it was anything else, but to me, I was very proud of this because it was my creation. Now, those were just things that I used. There was no life in it. Some of you are creators, like musicians. They create music. And if you talk to a musician, those words, or even not just the lyrics, but the music itself, has some kind of life that when people listen to it, it can motivate them, it can inspire them. So there's some kind of life in there. But see, David is acknowledging that his whole being, God made. And then he says, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Now, in some scripture, it says that who is made man like us, that you, God, you are mindful of him. Little lower than angels, you made them. Well, what does that mean? Well, when you think of angels, even some of the stories we hear, people talk around the globe about angels, we know that they're super beings that don't have the limitations that we have. But that scripture says we were made a little lower than angels. In other words, God's very highest creation. Now, the reason why this is important is if our sense of identity is going to be based on something else or someone else who did not take part in our creation, probably that won't be the smartest thing because they don't know anything about us. Now, we talk about scientists, we talk about psychologists, we talk about sociologists, we talk about all these different, very bright people who studied human beings, but none of them made one. We have heard about cloning and all those things. That's not the same thing as creation. Then the last scripture, which is that most of us Christian people are very familiar with, is Galatians chapter 2, verse 20. And this is Apostle Paul talking about another sense of this identity. To make sense of this scripture, you have to know where this Paul came from. Before his name was changed to Paul, he used to be called Saul of Tarsus. He was not a very good person in terms of how he treated other people. He used to arrest people, persecute them, arrest them, because according to him and many of the leaders, it was not okay for people to follow Jesus. If you follow Jesus, you are going to be persecuted, and most people also were even killed for that. So when he went through his own transformation from the Saul of Tarsus to this Paul, something happened there. There was a change of his identity. And later on, I'll tell you the two different types of identity. So here he says, I am crucified with Christ. Nevertheless, I live, yet not I, but Christ lives in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. When you know about this man's life and his story, it's like there's an old Saul, then there's a new Saul. The difference being the old Saul really didn't care too much about these people called Christians. He wanted to get rid of them. But the new Saul, when he was given the name Paul, that was a very new identity, because this new Paul now, instead of making people suffer for Christ, he himself was the one suffering for Christ and became really a big champion for the cause of Christ. So this is how we see identity from God's perspective. Now, a lot of us scientists of different types, we try to understand this whole idea, especially the idea of self-esteem. As parents, there are books written about how to raise children with a healthy self-esteem or a good self-esteem. And so some books written to say, don't do such and such because you will ruin your children's self-esteem. So how does that happen? Well, one of the things that we have learned in this class is how so much of our lives, how they pan out, is actually outlined in our own brains. That's one of the reasons why we did those brain maps that we did weeks back. So the brain's perspective on identity is there's two sources of identity, a true identity and one I call acquired identity or perceived identity. The thalamus, which is the part that you see shaded in that picture, this is the place that defines true identity. When you were conceived, when you were just a cell, and that cell divides, when your life begins, it begins there. And so when you hear people talk about my heart, sometimes people talk about my heart meaning the physical pump that pumps blood that keeps us alive. But sometimes people talk about the heart, meaning the center of their being. Um, when you see people talk about the heart in that way, they are actually also referring to how the Bible talks about the heart. When Jeremiah said the heart is exceedingly or can be exceedingly corrupt, who can know it? He's not talking about this. He's talking about that heart, the center of our being. So when we talk about true identity, a true identity, you have it when you're born, before you're born, that identity we're talking about is already there, the basis of it. Now, as you grow, you are going to interact with the world, and your first interactions are going to be with your mom, and then it's going to be with your dad, it's going to be with the people around you. But who you are, you're already coming in programmed with that. This is one of the reasons why scientists tell us that a child's true personality or identity is already formed by the age 6, about 80% of it. And they say you only have 20% to work with later on. What does that mean? It means there is some intrinsic parts of who you are that David is talking about. This is what God put together. And that is the source of who we really are. What's interesting to me is I have worked with a lot of people on this issue. That true identity we're talking about, that we're born with, it can either be nurtured or cultivated, preserved, and be made better depending upon who is working on it. Or sometimes with what we call effective parenting or good parenting is knowing this identity of this child and not trying to twist it and to make it what we want it to be, but kind of following it. And that's why in Proverbs says, raise a child in the way they should go. Some people think that it means you, the parent, you decide, I want my child to go this way, therefore I'm going to raise them this way. But that's not really what that means. It means you raise them according to who they are, so you can raise them that way instead of kind of breaking them. There is a phenomenon that most of us have heard of and we know about, what they call the terrible two. Actually, the terrible two does not happen around 2 years. It's a little older than that, somewhere around 3. So what do they mean by that? They mean the child is really being very, very rebellious and uncooperative, and they only want to say no to everything. Or if they see something, they say it's mine, and you're going, well, what's going on? The reason why we call it the terrible two, because it's terrible for us parents, because we don't know what to do with it. But what's happening with that child is that they're beginning to step into their own identity, and they're trying to define things according to them and not according to you and I. And one of the mistakes that we make as parents is going like, oh no, sir, you are not going to be like that. Not in this family, you are going to be this way. And that's how sometimes we break that person. At that moment, we are no longer encouraging this. But we may do what we call, it can be covered up or suppressed. Because that child is going to learn very quickly that if I say mine, mine, I get slapped or I get punished something, or therefore I shouldn't say mine, mine. I just let it go. Or if you say no, no, sir, you don't say no to this, you say yes. That child may realize, well, I really wanted to say no, but I can't say no because I know what's going to happen. I'm just going to say yes. So at that moment now we are moving away from encouraging this true identity, we are now beginning to create a different identity. And those the identities that we are going to talk about as acquired identity or perceived identity. And those identities give us a lot of problems because they are not really what God made us to be. It's what we might want to make or what other people try to make that identity for us. There are so many stories of this. Most people have heard of this. Preachers tell a lot of good stories, but sometimes they don't tell you where they got them from. You know, I'm sure you've heard of the story of the little boy who, I think it was the father who, or a friend who was very critical of this young boy because he didn't look like the other kids. He didn't do what the other kids did, and they were treating him as you were nothing really. You were just junk. And the kid said, "No, I'm not, because God does not make junk." And so this little kid knew a truth that was so important that what God makes, it can't be bad. When I was in seminary, I lived in the dorm, and down there, downtown Dallas, there were a lot of homeless people and the people who drink a lot and just live on the streets. And many times they would come right in front of Lincoln Hall where I lived, because Dallas Seminary has changed quite a bit now. Back then, when I was there, you couldn't go to class without a suit and tie. And no beards were allowed, not even sideburns. I mean, clean cut, that's how it was. So we looked like businessmen with all these suits. So these people thought we had money. So as soon as you step out of the dormitory, before you cross the street to go to class, they're asking you for money and things like that. And some of the students who were there before, some of the new people, they would tell us, "Oh, no, don't give those people money, because they're going to buy booze and drink. If you want to help them, take them across to McDonald's and buy them food. Don't give them this." Well, most of us didn't have money to give them. But one of my friends, we were walking out there, and the guy sits there and says, "Can you guys please give me some money?" And my friend looked at me and said, "Hey, let's do this. Let's take them over to McDonald's, buy them breakfast." So we walked across the street to go to McDonald's, and we buy them food. So we're going back to class. And my friend said, have you ever stopped to think what kind of value God puts on that guy? And I said, "No, I didn't think about that." He said, "We think that the value he puts on us is higher than the value he puts on that guy." And I said, "Yeah, I think you're right." And he says, "Well, the thing that helps me is to always know that that man has the same value like I have." Now, that's not how our world works. Our world works differently. So the goal of our lesson is not just for us to understand our identity, to understand the identity of other people, because when we do, we learn how to treat other people actually in a much better way than we would. So this suppressing of the true identity, it happens in two ways. One of the biggest ways that it happens is when the child is really mistreated and told all these negative things about themselves. It only takes time before that child begins to believe the things that they're being told. That's why it's never a good idea for parents to say, if you keep doing this, you're going to amount nothing, or you're going nowhere, or, you end the rest of your life flipping burgers or something like that. It's not predictive, but what it is, it suppresses all this, the true identity that really wants to push up and become, achieve whatever the potential that child has. So Now we move to the next section of this, which is what I call acquired identity or perceived identity. Now, let me talk about the difference between these two. They are the same, but not quite. Perceived identity is what you perceive to be your identity. Acquired identity is an identity that you take on because of either what you are doing or what other people are doing or what other people are saying to you. Now, in your book, in this chapter that we're reading, I think it's page 56, there's a story there. You don't have to read it if you haven't. I'll just tell you the story. This man, he was a 40-year-old retired soccer player named Timothy. So for Timothy, being a professional soccer player, making a lot of money. I don't know if any of you watch European soccer. They get paid ridiculous money, kind of like some of our NFL players. It elevates them to where everybody wants to see them. Every Sunday they fill out all these stadiums watching them and sometimes writing autographs. I mean, everybody's just in awe of them. So Tim does all this in his youth, and at 40 he had to retire because you can't play sports all your life. So when he retires, something starts happening, and his wife says, something is wrong with you. You are depressed. You don't want to do anything. You are short with me. You are short with the kids. What's going on? And he starts saying things such as, I don't know who I am anymore. And things such as, oh, I've lost myself. I've lost my identity. I'm not important anymore. I'm not significant anymore. When Sunday comes, I have to sit and watch other people get praise and claps and everything else. No one remembers me anymore. When I go out there, some people may say, oh, yeah, this team, he used to play for such and such. But all the younger people, they don't know. It's kind of like in our country, a lot of the football players that, like the people that played when I first came to this country some 40 years ago, some of them have gotten real old. Some of them have actually died. Some of them, if you said, you know who so-and-so is? They're going like, who is that? Because they don't know. But that's what happened to Tim. The problem with Tim was that the idea of identity was totally based on what he was doing, his celebrity status. That's a trap that all of us can get caught in. Now, we'll talk more about Tim when we start talking about how can we deal with this, what can we do when this is going on with us. So one of the reasons why this happens is society has its own idea of what identity is. So they ascribe identity to us. And some of these identities, even though they are acquired identities, they are not necessarily bad. Some of them are quite nice behavioral traits that are good, but they are not a person's identity. You ladies, you probably went from you were somebody's child, then you became somebody's sister, and then you became somebody's wife, and then you got a job, you became a teacher. All these are all identities that you had, right? And then you keep going, sometimes you become a grandmother. These acquired identities, they change. They are not bad, but they are not really who you are. Because if you make one of those identities your true identity, what happens when that changes? What happened to Tim is he didn't have any other way of seeing himself except, I'm a soccer player. I'm a celebrity. His money, he still had. His fancy house, he still had. His fancy cars, he still had. but he didn't have notoriety that came with Sunday when he's out there, looks the 80 to 100,000 people. Just when he hit the ball, they start yelling his number. That that went away, but he didn't go away. Some behavior, some activity went away. We are not our activities or our behaviors, which is one of the things when you read in the chapter. I make an argument of good behavior is good, but it doesn't describe who you are. It just describes what you do, but not who you are. Now, one of the perceived identity that you do yourself, not other people, is when you yourself begin to define yourself by how you perceive yourself. When I was a kid, growing up in Southern Africa, some of you who read politics and history, you probably have heard of a system of government that was used in that part of the world, which is called apartheid. So in that system, it says all the different nationalities of people, they need to live in separate sections of the city. Kind of like here in Dallas. Let's say people that live in Plano, they will be, let's say there are white people that live in Plano. Then the people that live in Irving, they will be Indian. Then people that live in Oak Cliff, there will be black people. But in this country, people can live there. They can live anywhere they want. In that system, you are not allowed, you break the law if you live in a different place. So if you wanted to go to Plano, you have to get a passport to go to Plano. And the reason why you couldn't go to Plano because you are not as good as the people that live in Plano. And that system went as far as saying, well, actually, black people, you are not as smart as white people. You don't have the same value as white people. There was the prime minister of, he was called Rhodesia back then, Ian Smith. In fact, after his time of being a prime minister, he actually settled in Texas, and he had arranged somewhere here. His famous words when he was prime minister was that during his lifetime, there's no black person who can rule the country of Rhodesia. Why? Because you guys are just a little bit above baboons and monkeys, so you don't have the smarts to be able to run the country. See, this is how this type of system would give us a different identity. And a lot of our people bought that identity. And because of it, if you were facing a white person, you have to realize that you are lower than they are. So every white person was a boss, even a little boy like this. Every white woman was a madam, not black people. And it messed up a lot of people. And as a result, some people have not been able to overcome that. Why? Because they bought that view of identity because of the perception that when you're like this, it means this. Now, one of the things that even though some of these acquired identity or perceived identity, they're pretty nice and good, we don't want to knock them. I'm sure any of you, if someone comes to you and say, Papa, you are such a great teacher, you'll say, thank you. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you thought being a great teacher, that's the only thing that's important about you, that becomes a problem. Because what happens when you don't teach? Because some of these things, they are not with us all the time. Now, we're going back to that story of Tim, so I can show you how these acquired identities or perceived identities, how they develop in all of us, not just in somebody like Tim. So in page 56 in your book, um, there are these four beliefs, what I call distorted beliefs that Tim developed are not the only ones. There are many, but this is just some good examples so you can see what we're talking about. So one of his beliefs was that being a celebrity actually added more value to his identity. Um, in our society, sometimes they publish this in magazines. Uh, the most important men in the whole world. And you look at that person and go like, what are they going by? Sometimes it's because he has done something outstanding. Yeah. Sometimes, or because he's very good looking. Sometimes because he's a celebrity, not an average person. Um, that status, even though our society gives them more value, but they don't have any more value than other people. In fact, I've heard some people in our society say, you know what, we need to elevate teachers than sports figures. They say, why? Because at least teachers are teaching our kids. Some of these celebrities, some of these sports people, some of them are really kind of crybabies because, I mean, they complain about some of the stupidest things, but we have elevated them and they really think they're very, very important. That's why they may not know anything about politics, but they will say something else in the papers and the TV is talking about, do you know what so-and-so says? It must be very important. And this is a result. And so we can't really blame Timothy for that because this is probably what he saw when he was growing up. It may have had something to do with why he really wanted to play soccer. It may not have been because he liked the game. He wanted something that will elevate him. The statement I made there to him was that a person's value actually lies in his or her personal. Just being a person gives you value. You don't have to do anything for it. It's interesting that in that Genesis passage, God said, let's make him in our likeness. Let's make him in our image. And then he says, in his image created he them, male, female. So you can see the image of God in both male and female. So what does that mean? Here's what it doesn't mean. Nobody has seen what God looks like. We can say maybe Moses says he passed in front of him. I don't even know what Moses saw. The only thing we know is when he came down that mountain, he had to cover his face. So I don't think the likeness of God is what he looks like. But we were made in that image, in that likeness. And it doesn't say you have to believe in God or be a church person or a Christian to have been made in the image of God. It doesn't say that. Every human being, even the people who hate him, their identity is in him. They were made in the likeness of God. And that's why some of us believe that we have to respect humanity, not because human beings are very good. We can just look at what we're doing, Those are Hamas people, they are human beings too, but look at what they did to innocent people. So value has nothing to do with what we do. The second belief that Timothy had, he believed that his identity was determined by what people thought of him. You know, when you're a performer, whether it's sports or music or whatever, your mind is really tailored to listen to what people are going to say. Are they approving of what you're doing? How many applauses do you have? Are they standing up? Are they buying all your records? I think it was a couple of weeks ago I heard that there was a movie based on Taylor Swift's concert or something like that. And they were saying he was making so much money. Obviously, that makes her very happy. But it would be a mistake if she thought, because of that, because she's so popular, she's better than other people. See? Someone who's dressed better than somebody else is not better than a person just because of what they are dressed like. The problem some of us have with when people place their value on what other people think is that these other people were not there when we were created. They were created too. What gives them the right to define who we are? So their opinions don't really matter in terms of who we are. Now, they may, rightly so, develop opinions by what we do, by what we say, because they can see this. But that has no bearing on value or on identity. We are not what we do. We are who we are because that's who we are. The third distorted belief that Timothy had, he believed that because he was a celebrity, he really didn't need God. Therefore, what if God had to say anything about his identity, it didn't apply to him. It had no meaning to him. Some of you saw that movie, Forrest Gump. Somewhere in there, when he was on his boat, his shrimp boat, Captain Dane came to join him. And Captain Dane, he lost his legs in the war. And so they're on the boat, and it starts raining and thundering. And Captain Dane was very bitter because he lost his legs, and he blamed God for it. You see him just on top of the sails and screaming, God, come here, almost like let's fight in this. Why? Because man wants to blame God when things go bad, or ask God to help when things go bad, but sometimes don't want to acknowledge that that's our source of our life. Some people usually say, well, that should only apply like to Christian and church people. No, it should apply to every human being because we're all made in the image of God. As far as God is concerned, the value we have, he put that value in us. That's what it means to be made in his own image. See, I could make something that like me. I don't have the power, the ability to make someone in my likeness. Now, those of us who are parents, if you have a child that looks just like you didn't actually say, yeah, I'm going to make this child look just like me. God did it, it's not you that did it. Then the fourth distortion he had is he believed that a person can actually lose his or her identity. Well, that's not true either. Why? Because an identity is something that God gave you. You can't lose it. since we don't earn our identities, we cannot lose them either. The truth is, they can be covered up, or we ourselves can cover it up because we are opting for an acquired identity because we think it'll get us somewhere in the world. One of the stories that's in this chapter, and I've talked about it before, it fits here because this is something that I have kind of challenged a few times. This particular time, I was actually playing golf at Riverside Golf Course. And if you go play during the week, you're going to find business people who are skipping the office to go play. So they put me with these three guys. I didn't know them. We didn't know each other. So we get on the first tee. Usually you shake hands. You tell them your name. That's really what's important, your name. Not so much your last name, just your first name, so they know who to call you. But it didn't go very far before people started asking, so what do you do for living? And some guy, you could tell he was just eating up. I'm a corporate lawyer. And he's just thinking, now I'm over here. No one else is going to get. The other guy was a manager of a computer company. And they look at me, so what about you? And I said, I'm going to tell you what I do. Because I just came here to have some fun. I don't want to be talking big business. No, I'm just. And you would think they would be okay with it, right? Well, no, they start asking. Well, sometimes people like this, maybe you work for the CIA or the IRS or something like that, because those are the people who hide their identity. And I said, no, or I can tell you I work. But this is not work. This is funny. I'm not going to tell you what. And there was another guy over there. They went to him, what about you? He says, well, he's on a technical support for one of the schools. Oh, I knew this guy. I used to speak a lot to schools in this whole area, to young people. And I knew this guy was a janitor at one of the schools in Arlington. I knew he was. But that's not what he said. He came up with some other phrase. I know exactly why he came up with that. Because he realizes, if I don't come up with something else, I'll be the lowest of this value thing. And so we keep going. Finally, they realize this guy's not going to tell us. So now it's almost like they don't know where to put me. And I'm thinking to myself, let my golf game kind of define why I like to do this here, because I'm playing pretty good. The guy, the school guy, is riding in the same cart with me. So he finally wants to tell me the truth. He said, you know what? He didn't know I knew him. He says, I feel bad about telling these guys what's mean. I don't want to be seen as, a guy who is not important at all. He says, you see, that's why when I come in here, I make sure that I dress nicely. And his equipment was pretty good too, because he was just trying to up his value. It's so sad here to do that. If we didn't have to talk about this at all, the whole conversation was going to be, oh, that's a good shot, or that's a poor shot. Can I help you with this? That I will take any day, but don't start to tell me, well, you're not as good as this. And the other one of the reasons why I don't like telling people what I do when I'm out there, especially when I'm playing with other guys, because they have a bad habit of saying, oh, you're a counselor? Yeah, oh yeah, I need to send my wife to you. Yeah. As if they themselves don't have any issues to deal with. So this last section, I think, let's cover this after our short break. We are prone to have, as human beings, and we have to have some way of correcting some of those distorted beliefs or ideas. There's a thing that most of us know is called paranoia or unfounded fear or irrational fears. Some people don't realize that those irrational fears, unfounded fears, they are really based on some distorted belief. And we just looked at some of what Timothy's were about identity. But that covers a lot of other things. So most of us who our job is to help us kind of get on the right track. So when we're talking about identity, there are certain, I call them exercises that I would give people to do to help them first see or discover how they got to where they are in terms of some of their distorted beliefs. So some of these things that I suggested that he and I do, some version of this would be helpful for anyone. And some of you parents or teachers, if you're dealing with somebody, a friend or a family member who has distortions, some of these ideas, some version of it is very, very helpful. And so the first one, I was asking him to say, hey, let's do this. I have many different ways to describe this. And I said, I just want you to write out as many words as you can that mean identity to you, that you think are synonymous with identity. Sure, you probably guessed right that the words that he was writing down was like money, fame, good physique, good looking. I mean, all those things were very superficial. So you can see why his identity is all visual, it's all out here. And once he wrote all those things down and said, okay, so this is why your identity is really based around the things you've written. Then we started going back to one by one. I'm going like, so if having a lot of money means you have good identity, what does having less money mean? Poor identity. And I say, according to who? Some of you who have gone like on mission trips or you've gone to other countries other than our country, you probably realize that some of those people are so poor, but they don't seem to make them feel inferior or less than. Some of the happiest people you may have seen were those people who may have only 2 changes of clothes that when they're wearing this, they washed one, it's drying, and as soon as that dries, they wear that one, that's all they have. Why? Because the whole thing is not based on materialistic things, which is, in our society, in our country, this has even invaded the church, to where in the church you're finding people putting more value on people with money. I remember being at a church where every elder in that church was not just a well-known businessman, but was a very wealthy person. And I was talking to a friend of mine in the church, and I said, how do you select elders here? He says, oh, we need godly men. And I said, it's funny that all your godly men are very wealthy. And are there no godly men that are not wealthy, that are not worthy, that could be elders? And I said, well, the challenge I give you is in book of Acts when the Holy Spirit told the apostles to choose elders, the requirements that had they were not like the ones you're putting. Of course, that didn't go very well. But um, so writing these words helped Tim really see that I was basing everything on things that I can see that was very materialistic. And you have heard of a thing now they refer to as prosperity gospel, meaning the measure of one being blessed by God according to those people is how much they have. If you don't have this, that means God is not blessing you. You are not really walking with God. If you're walking with God, you have all these things, which is not true at all. Okay, so then I asked him, so let's rewind. Let's go back in time. Before you were a soccer player, before you were a famous person, before you had all these things you had, let's go back there. What did you think about yourself then? And some of the words that he wrote, I had no money. I was a nobody. Nobody paid any attention to me. I was sort of kind of worthless. I was so lucky that I made it, and when I made it, I got in there, and all of a sudden, I almost like I'm reborn. And I said, you see, that's why today, when you look at people who are not celebrities, you don't ascribe high value to them because they don't have these things that you're thinking about. And I said, but really, did you have friends back then? Oh yeah, I had some friends. Honestly, I mean, did you not enjoy anything? And now it's just being honest. You say, well, I didn't know what life would be like here. So I was fine with that. I was running around with my friends. We didn't have much, I wasn't craving for anything because that's what I had. And I said, so what happened? As soon as he got in there, it got into his head. And all of a sudden, that's when he started, seeing all these things. So these two exercises are very helpful to bring people back to where they were. It's not a bad practice for us to always go back to our beginnings. And sometimes it helps us to be very thankful, seeing how far we've come, and realize that maybe it's not what I did. There may be a lot of other people along the way who helped us get to where we are today. A friend of mine, I think it was 2-3 years ago, I went to Bible school with him back in Zimbabwe, and I went to the seminary with him here, and he teaches in Cambridge in the UK. We don't talk a lot when he's busy. I'm busy. But one time he came up with an idea. I said, I think it's important to tell people who have meant to us while they are alive, because when they're gone, they don't know that. And I said, you're right. And then he starts telling me, this is the very first guy who discipled me. When I became a Christian, when I went to Bible school, I didn't know anything about prayer or Bible study, anything. This is the guy who taught me that. So I'm thinking I'm the one who should be telling you, thanking you. I said, oh, no. And during my birthday celebration, he and his wife, they made a video that, how Cindy pulled this out, I have no idea, because I didn't know this was happening. So I didn't know when I'm there, and I'm still surprised by all the people who showed up. But then these videos, and then he says to me, well, welcome to the grown-ups. because he's like 80, 80 years old. Um, so one of the things that I didn't, and if you're talking to somebody who is doesn't go to church, doesn't want anything about church, it really doesn't matter. The story, the Genesis story, is a powerful one to anyone who's a human being. And so we read it, and I said, okay, so what do you think? I said, no, you may not believe in God, that's fine. I said, but according to this passage, what do you think God thinks about us human beings? What do you think? He says, well, if I believe this, I would have to say he must think very highly of people. That's why do you think that? He says, well, if he gave us his likeness, his image, that's pretty powerful. And I said, that's right. And I said, so what is that based on? Do you think that requires no qualification? In other words, everyone. He said, yeah. I said, yeah, that's right. And then he says, well, I wish I could have that view, because if I had that view, I may think of other people better than I think of them right now. Now, after these exercises, he was ready. Now, he was ready to change his view about his identity, because we had challenged it enough. And then I said, well, maybe, let's think about someone else. And I said, you may not know a lot about stories in the Bible. And I said, there's a guy, King David. And I said, he was a king of Israel. Very wealthy. I mean, you think of a king. And I said, but boy, I mean, he made some terrible mistakes. And I said, I'll tell you one that you probably will not forget easily. And I said, he was the king. He was supposed to go to battle with his men, but he decided to hang back. But it looked like he knew that one of his commanders was going over there. He was leaving his wife behind, and he sort of had an eye on this lady. So he decided to take this woman, and thought that if I just get that guy get killed, then I can have this. And I said, that's pretty bad. He said, yeah, that's pretty bad. And I said, well, when God was talking in reference to this guy, this terrible king, God said, well, he was a man after his own heart. He said, well, you know what that means? He says, well, there must be something like he saw him as special. And I said, yeah. Now, why would he see him as special when he did such a horrible thing? And I said, because, when someone says this is a man after my own heart, it means there's something special about him. I said, I tell you what was so special about this King David was not what he did, but what God put in him. And I said, that's why our identity cannot be based on anything else except who we are. Now, there are a lot of things about identity and how to shed these acquired identities. And most of those acquired identities, other people give them to us, and very bad experiences give them to us. On the golf course, you hear a lot of these things. Someone, they call it army golf, which means left and right. He misses it that way, he misses that way. They call it left and right army golf. And some people get very frustrated. And they said, well, stupid. Why are you so stupid doing this? And I'm going like, no, you're not stupid. This is a very tough game. Even the pros make those mistakes. Take it easy on yourself. And so there are a lot of these things. And I thought to myself, next semester when I do another class, and I'm really going to go into details in terms of how these acquired identities, how we acquire them, and most importantly, how we can put them on other people, especially uh, family, kids, grandkids, and giving people some identities and ideas of how to correct things like that. So this is where we end our lesson for today. And next week